Can we look at the minutes of the meeting of July 18th?
Okay.
Approved.
Motion to accept.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any corrections? Not all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. TDP progress report, Cassandra.
Already. So, the TDP, Transit Development Plan, is something that we put together every 5 years. And the last one we did was really based on our community bus plan. So the Department of Transportation mandates that we have something called the Transit Development Plan. But really what it's doing is it's mandating good planning. So for an agency like ours, where we have a planning department and we think about this all the time, it's not that much of a stretch. For smaller agencies across the state of Florida, they set out a very prescriptive way to put together a TDP, so there's some consistency about the information that the department gets. Then every year after that major update, so every 5 years we do a major update, it's a 10-year plan. Every year after that, we do a progress report. And so this agenda item in front of you is about the progress report that we will send to the Department of Transportation. So this is something that we do every year. It is something that we take a look at our major update and just say, what have we accomplished, and have our priorities changed? And it's really an opportunity for us to just write it down. So you have in front of you a list of accomplishments since the last progress report, in terms of our innovative programs, the partnerships that we've had, some of our regional projects, and then you also have under the TDP, the draft itself, there is a list of the priorities that really haven't changed since our last update, but it gives us a chance to add in a couple of other things. So it's on the handout, I think, page 2 of the handout. So we have kept a lot of this the same. There is one change is we've added transit signal priority under advanced technologies. And so what that project and that addition allows us to do is to work with the county ATMS folks and their ITS system and seek FDOT grants together that could help improve that system that would include transit signal priority. But the rest of the operating and capital priorities that we have had over the last couple years still remain on the list, and we can still continue to work on them, and this allows us to essentially go fishing in the FDOT pond.
Great place to fish.
Question? It's a good time for questions about that specific?
Absolutely, yes.
So when we get into the ITS, are we talking about having transit having a priority because of the vehicle, as the vehicle's approaching, or automatically, or is that where it's going?
Yes, a real good example of that in a project is in the Central Avenue BRT. So transit signal priority is included when we do major capital investment projects like that. It doesn't mean that we can't do it other places. So one of the other items in front of you today is about our service changes, and we'll talk about a limited stop service that we are proposing for October on the Route 52. So by adding this to our TDP, we may be able to go to the county and say, what kinds of equipment do you have out there now? How can we use our automatic vehicle locator, our Clever CAD system, to tap into that? Is there any augmentation that we need to do? Oh, okay, it's going to cost us X number of dollars. FDOT, can we have half? That allows us to do something like that without necessarily having a major capital investment project like the Central Avenue BRT.
I see Wynn in here, and I have questions, all kinds of questions about ITS. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you.
Other questions about
So the action item is to approve the transmission of this progress report to the DOT. We do this annually by September 1st in order to maintain our cycle in their grants program.
Okay, I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any other questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Could this be on consent for the
Yeah.
board meeting?
I think so, yeah, pretty minor changes.
Thank you.
All right, good.
Okay, October service changes, Mr. Lusher.
All right, good morning, thank you. This is what Cassandra was talking about. We've got some service changes coming up for October 7th, and this is what we do 3 times a year, June, February, October. This is also in accordance with our path forward. Something very interesting happened yesterday. I'm going to leave with something a little different. We brought this to our track committee, and I've been here going on a little more than 14 years now, and at no point have we ever brought them a service change where I've seen such enthusiasm and support for moving it forward. I mean, literally people saying, I love this. This is great. I'm not used to that. Service changes don't usually get received like that. So let me show you what they were so enthusiastic about. It centers around the Route 52. And if you're not familiar with it, Route 52 runs from Park Street Terminal, right in downtown Clearwater, down Clearwater Largo Road, along East Bay, West Bay, then 49th, pretty much all the way down to Grand Central and St. Pete. It's a tough schedule. If you pick up a schedule, I probably should have brought some. I'm sorry, you can get them on the way out if you like, down in the lobby. We have headways between 20 minutes and 40 minutes, 20, 30, sometimes in between 40, 45. We're going to straighten those out. We're going to get them to every 30 minutes. We're going to, right now it runs from about 5:30 in the morning to about 11:30 at night, and it's our #1 ridership route, 1.2 million plus last year. Very, very busy route. What years ago we did to try to help people getting in and out of Carillon was put some express routes, limited stop express routes, to really parallel the 52. And the 98, and I'll go through these in detail, 98's on the north side, the 97's on the south side. So the Route 98 currently runs from Park Street pretty much along the same lines, comes downtown, and this is moving one way in the morning, goes through Carillon and ends up at the Criminal Court Center. And the idea years ago was that it would be limited stop and move people around pretty quickly. It only runs 3 times in the morning and only 2 times in the evening. The 97 is kind of a mirror of that. On the south side, it runs more frequently. You can see we have 4 runs morning and evening. But that'll start in downtown St. Petersburg, goes to Grand Central, and then pretty much mirrors the 52 on the way up. And these routes have never been very strong in the ridership. I've used them. Sometimes they back up with the 52, and we've been looking at them and said, you know, let's just fold them into the 52. Because we can do a lot more with that service that the riders are really liking, which is good from what we see. What it'll let us do is we'll be able to go with consistent headways every 30 minutes from 5:30 in the morning to 11:30. We're going to take the 97s and 98s and fold them into a 52, we're calling it the LX right now, Limited Express. Those will be the runs that actually go into Carillon to pick up those loads from the 97 and 98. So we're not taking away that service, we're basically renaming it. We're going to remarket it. And also, because we're going to be making 4 runs in and out of Carillon, people who are on the 98 right now are going to actually have more access to Carillon by doing this. Their limited stop is not as scary as it sounds. They're only about half a mile. We don't want them any less than half a mile. But right now, we've got a lot of them that are a quarter of a mile. So it should move along more quickly. We'll also have better spacing on it, so we won't see the buses. We don't anticipate at all seeing the buses bunch unless there's something like an accident. So you can see the Carillon service now will run from 6:40 in the morning to 8:30, and this is only on weekdays. 4 runs there and 4 runs in the afternoon between 3:40 and 5:30. So we're going to even it out. We're going to have more frequent service every 15 minutes during peak time, during peak rush hour. Yes.
Bob, where does is there actually going to be a situation where the bus running through Caroline hooks up with a regular 52, or is it just going to be certain 52s are going to cut on in and out?
Yeah, it'll be paralleling. There will be a lot of stops along the way where people, if they need to, can get off and get on the regular 52, including at PSTA right here at the lay-by. And in fact, on the next slide, that's another big benefit that we're going to do. Because right now, the 52 on the weekends doesn't come into the lay-by. It only does during the week. They don't all go into Pinellas Park Transit Center. So this change will allow us to really make that consistent. So now they will all go to Pinellas Park Transit Center, which is a really big busy transfer facility, and right here at the lay-by. So it gives them the chance to change as they need it. And one of the things that I want to point out that we will be changing is right now, that 97 runs from downtown St. Pete to Grand Central. We're just folding that into the rest of 52. We're going to start everything from Grand Central because in that corridor we have the 18, we've got the Central Avenue trolley, we have the 14, we have the 5, and depending where you are in downtown, some other routes is too. They can get people to and from St. Petersburg, all to Grand Central, and pretty quickly.
I'm sure I got another question.
Yeah.
Okay, if somebody's in downtown and they take one of the routes that you mentioned to get to Grand Central, is that a change where they're going to have to pay another $2?
If they've only bought a one-way fare, yes, the transfer they would have to.
Okay, so what we're counting on is most people have a pass
Yes.
or something like that, so it's really not going to cost them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Actually, following up on that question, do we have data that shows that most of the people that are using those routes, like the 97, that section that's being taken away, are using passes, or are they, how are the folks that are using that line now?
I don't know if we should be able to pull that, but I'm not sure if it's that route specific. That's not,
We do from our onboard survey.
we have oh, that's right. And most commuters, because they ride that, do. One who showed up at the public hearing yesterday did as well.
So one of the reasons that we decided that this would be good to present as a service change is because there are sections of the 52 that get quite crowded, and the 98 and 97 have the capacity. What's not happening is the 52 riders recognizing that these two routes overlay each other and they could be filling the capacity on the 97 and 98. And so this is as much a rebranding exercise than anything else, in that now by calling it the same as a similar name, people could now say, oh, I can take either, right? And so that spreads out our availability to give people the rides that they need at our most congested times on our service.
And I think the change makes a lot of sense. But the question then becomes, though, the part that's missing is that connection from Grand Central to downtown, or Grand Central to to the Looper, where those folks that are downtown and wanting to go someplace else or wanting to get downtown are losing that connection. So ultimately I think it's a decent package. But what would so how far west does the Looper go?
We'll get to that in just a minute.
The
Actually,
thing that everybody does from Grand Central is it's only 75 cents to ride the Central Avenue trolley.
Yeah.
And that's very frequent. That's what everybody does. They get off all the different routes at Grand Central, and if they want to go downtown, they hop on that for a look. If they don't have a pass, it's the cheapest way to get downtown.
So yeah, they do have that discount option on the Central Avenue trolley, which we see gets good ridership, especially on that lane. This, what I just showed you, by the way, we had to take this to a public hearing last night. Had a handful of people showed up, and a lot like our track committee, they were all enthusiastic. They supported, even a driver who showed up and was looking to find problems with it. He said, "This is great." He said, "I don't know, this is great, no comment." Well, he had comments, but it was about other routes, which we took down. We'll put into the pipeline, but it was nice to see. I'll just take you through some of the other changes that we're looking at. Glad you brought up the Looper, because here is the looper map is in blue, the current one. You can see how far west it comes. It's like 5th Street. This will be changing. This is the new circulator route downtown we've been working on. This is where we're going to be deploying the electric buses. Pretty exciting. I am very eager to see this leg. I'm glad we were able to put this in. This brings it over to Bayfront and on All Children's. So you're looping that in along with USF. It'll still be going through to the Dolly while the Dolly is open, but it won't be going through their parking lot. It'll be turning around and coming back out. And if you've ever ridden the looper through that parking lot, or if you've ever gone to an event there, try to park when that thing's running through, we're happy to get it out of there. It'll be a lot easier. Most of the routing is very similar. We will be bringing it closer on the north end to the Palladium and also taking it off of the beach because of the parking and pedestrian issues on the beach. It can get pretty hairy in there. So this will be also October 7th. We'll be putting this in. Another thing our surveys found, which is not surprising, because it starts at 10 in the morning, almost all of the riders on the looper are tourists. And it's a fun, transportainment. You've got the tour guides as drivers as well. But we're going to start it at 7 in the morning now because we've got all of this service going to downtown St. Pete. Now our commuters can start using it to get around if they need to. They can transfer on to the looper, which will be free. And it's starting in October. Right now it's a quarter, 50 cents. Okay, so it'll be free as of October 7th. So they'll have free transfers when they get downtown. And I'm really eager to see how that works out. There are a few other minor changes we're going to have involved in the October 7th change. Route 20 right now runs just downtown north and south on 2nd Street. We're going to move that back to 3rd and 4th. The Route 23, there's a small segment in there between 22nd Avenue and 7th Avenue South. We had pushed that out a few years ago to 16th. We're going to bring it back to MLK. We've had requests for it. We had some better riderships. The 66th Limited, this is the one we run from in the early morning and the afternoon from Tarpon through Coachman Fundamental and then down right now to Park Street and to Morton Plant Meese. We're not getting any ridership really, any significant ridership from Park Street South, so we're gonna stop this at Park Street. Just terminate it there. The Suncoast Trolley, we're just going to move a time point. We have a nice new transit center out in Clearwater Beach on the schedule. We're going to put a time point there instead of out at Beach Walk. It's a better facility for it. And as I mentioned, of course, the changes from downtown. Any questions? Yes,
Where's the public hearing held?
Downstairs. It was in our because we like to have in central locations for the routes. We had it in the boardroom downstairs right after the track committee yesterday.
The only route that triggered the public hearing, or the only change, is the 52, the 97, and the 98. And so it does make sense to have it here. It's not all of, we're just showing you everything that we're doing because we don't get a chance to show off very often about what we do 3 times a year. But the only change that's required to be approved is that 52.
And the folks that are, so I have a little bit of a concern with getting from, if I'm mid-county hopping on the 52 and I work at All Children's Johns Hopkins, I have to take the 52 down to Grand Central, the Central Avenue BRT over to the Looper down to where I work.
You still have to do that with the 97. You still have to make a transfer to get down there.
Right, but we're talking about, but the 97 came from up, say, mid-county, came down into downtown where you just hop on the Looper, or you wouldn't necessarily because the timing wasn't there, but now we're adding that. So I'm just trying to think, if by making the time earlier on the Looper is to attract more workers than having a line that connects people who are living in there's a lot of apartment buildings, things like that going up mid-county, connecting those folks to the Looper, which we're trying to turn into a business Looper as well as just transportainment. It seems like there's a connection there that we're having folks kind of.
One of the things that we've been working on over the past several years is trying to eliminate a lot of the overlap because it's a very expensive service. When you're running from 5:30 in the morning to 11:30 at night, every 30 minutes, and in peak hour every 15 minutes, that is a really big chunk of money for that operation. So by moving it to Grand Central, putting that money into the rest of the route, we can actually do those frequencies and those hours. If we extend it to St. Pete, we can't do that. So we're looking at the other routes that they have options on, and we know that most of our riders are using a multi-day pass. That seemed to be the best option. And I know that the riders we spoke to yesterday, and they were all riders, and the public hearing people were really on
The
board.
52, the regular 52, which is the #1 route in the entire PSA system, already doesn't go downtown St. Pete. It just goes to Grand Central. So this would just marry it up. This would blend it, as Cassandra was saying, all the service together. I mean,
No, and I understand that. I was thinking more of the chunk that's being lost from the people that are staying South County, mid to South County.
Yeah.
And their connection there.
So this is part of a greater system. So if somebody was living in Largo and working at Johns Hopkins, they would probably go into Grand Central and take the 5 down anyway. It's because there's other routes that come up from South County and then go into the Innovation District and then come back up through downtown. And so that transfer is likely to be happening anyway for that particular trip. And it's hard to look at just these changes in isolation.
And I understand. That's why I prefaced by saying I think the change is a good change.
Yes.
My concern is just making sure that the people that are affected by that have good options, whether their options are already using, and so it doesn't really change anything for them except the bus number.
Right.
I just want to make sure that connection was thought of.
The majority of the people who are using this right now are trying to get to Carolina.
One time when I was personally riding the bus, I went out here to catch it here, and I don't know why, but I got on what I thought was the 52, but it wasn't. It was the 97, and it was completely empty. Or there was 2 ladies on it. They were both like Raymond James workers wearing sneakers, with their shoes. And oh my gosh, we went all the way down to St. Petersburg following the 52, and the 52 was completely jammed, standing room only, and it was just me and the 2 ladies. And so I said to them, I was like, "Why? We're just following that other bus. Why don't you ride that one? Why do you ride this one?" They're like, "Well, obviously that one's totally jammed with people, and we like to be alone. We like our own." It was very inefficient. This will make it at least more efficient.
Yeah.
It'll annoy those ladies probably.
So how are we, just to follow up on that question, how are we going to address the fact that, like, the time you and I took the 52 was packed,
Yeah, well, this will hopefully spread it
so
out.
are we going to do it just by frequency, or are we
Yes.
going to add bigger buses? I mean, what are we doing to try and resolve that issue?
Both, and keep the largest buses as much as we can on that route.
Let's talk about this, and why this is part of a bigger strategy. This route is part of our core network, and it's something that we further explored in the community bus plan, is how do we put more service on our core network? Because we know the frequency on the core routes is what drives our fare box recovery up, and it drives what drives the ridership up. And so we have to get to that point. So how do we make incremental changes in our entire system to sort of get to the point where we can take those travel demand numbers, right, that we're getting on our core network and translate those into major capital investment projects like the Central Avenue BRT. And so as we start to work through cost neutral changes, right, we systematically set ourselves up to compete for federal dollars on these routes and put some bigger investments there. And so this is very much part of a bigger strategy to get where we would ultimately like to go, which is to beef up that service with somebody else's money on those core routes.
Good.
Yeah, and then when we get that with BRT up and running, quick transfer, and it'll go take them right down to USF and the medical centers. There's one other change I want to bring up, which is my favorite. It's a minor change, one I've asked for from almost the day I started. We're going to allow our drivers who are on the trolley, Central Avenue trolley and Suncoast Beach trolley, to have these really nice looking Aloha style shirts.
Like the Jolly Trolley guys,
Yeah.
or something like that.
So
Yeah.
they look great. I've already put an order in for mine. And no, that's one of my favorites. But anyway, this is an action item, so
kidding.
For our public hearing.
We're hoping you will recommend approval to the board.
Move approval of the changes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any more questions? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Thank you.
Okay, what's next? Shelter deployment program. Heather, no, it's Bonnie.
Is it?
Oh,
sorry.
Sorry.
Community bus.
But I thought that.
Never mind.
Under shelter deployment.
Never mind. No, we,
Got it?
yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So Heather and I are going to tag team this a little bit, and then perhaps Heather's going to take my role at the board meeting. It's like a Broadway show where I'm the stand-in, and then we'll have our consultant here also at the board meeting. Unlike Bob's presentation, which was pretty much all good, and the public was all good, this presentation is really, the action item today I don't think will be, or this month will be that challenging, but this is a lot more challenging. And we're gonna get a lot, I think, of comments from the public about what we're recommending here. But this is all about building really a new transit system for PSTA based on what we're seeing in 2018. We've talked a lot about our innovative programs and stuff, but PSTA really, what this is representing is PSTA's recognition that we are not a transit system anymore. We need to be a mobility system. And that not everybody in the 2018 is going to be able to take a bus, can take a 40-foot bus that Henry maintains to where they need to go. They are going to take an Uber. They're going to take a small vehicle, maybe an autonomous vehicle someday. Again, the action item for the committee today to recommend, and then the action item at the board meeting this month, is just to approve of these changes that, these really major changes to the whole route network to go out into the public and to get more input. And then the big vote, the more challenging vote, will happen in December. Just a few notes. We've already had a lot of public outreach that have led us to this point where the consultants are making these recommendations to us. We have co-branded this effort, and a lot of the public input has been also helpful to the Ford Pinellas and with them. And then the biggest thing is that this is, I think, a lot different than 2012 and 13 when the board approved a plan that was very similar to this, but then ultimately we didn't implement most of the changes because because the public comes out when even if there's only 2 or 3 people that ride it a day, 7 people come to the board meeting and say this has a major impact on them. But we have a different solution now. We do have a mobility program that can continue to provide those rides using TNCs and cabs that we just did not have in 2013 and 14. So the fact of the matter is that ridership at PSTA is declining on our regular bus routes. This is a graph from the American Bus Benchmarking Group showing the 22 systems that we compare ourselves to all the time. And you can see the little red lines. It's not just us. It is almost every transit system in the United States is seeing declines in their bus ridership. Ours is actually a little bit less than most others. There are a few exceptions, however, that I'm going to show you. This is the current PSTA route system, where we've talked in the past that we have, and Cassandra was talking about, we have core routes and we have coverage routes. Core routes are our high ridership routes like the 52 that are most frequent. They're on the major corridors of Pinellas County. They're on US 19, they're on Ulmerton Road, on Gulf to Bay, on 4th Street, on Central Avenue. They carry the most people. And then we have a whole bunch of other routes called coverage routes that are these green routes that serve all the other corridors. Just to provide a sort of peanut butter thin spread of bus service to all parts of the county. And And those are the routes that are seeing the biggest declines in ridership. If you do a mathematical calculation, we're at 50-50. Our transit system globally across Pinellas County is set up 50% core, 50% of our resources, our buses and money and costs are on those red lines, the core routes, and then 50% of our costs and resources and buses are on the other routes. Houston is actually seeing ridership increases. Houston went to an 80-20, where they concentrated their resources on their core routes and went to and much fewer on the coverage routes, and their ridership actually went up, while almost every other system in the country went down. Jacksonville has done the same thing. They doubled their frequency on their core routes, and their ridership went up. Seattle didn't cut routes, coverage routes, but they invested a lot more in their system, and they did basically the same thing where they really invested in their core routes, and they are one of the only other systems that's actually seen a ridership increase, while everyone else has seen a decrease. Actually, also in Seattle, only 25% of their mode split is auto drivers alone. It's pretty cool. So that's what we're proposing. This is not that dissimilar to what we proposed back in 2013, but essentially what we're proposing, assuming that there's no new revenue, that we would take resources from our low ridership coverage routes and move them to the high ridership core routes, taking the resources for these routes down here and investing them in the ridership in these routes up here. That's essentially what we're proposing. I'll pass it over to Heather, the expert, to tell you why.
Thanks, Brad. So yes, as Brad was just saying, these systems that did see increases in ridership, there are some key things they looked at. They made their service fast, they made it frequent, and they made it reliable. So we want to look at making our routes more direct, more streamlined, not meandering into neighborhoods. We want to maybe look at our bus stops, where we have bus stops maybe 8 per mile, maybe reduce those so we have less stopping and less traffic delays. And then we also want to work with our local jurisdictions to make some improvements such as transit signal priority and bus lanes, perhaps in small sections, and queue jumps on those core routes. The service needs to be frequent. Our core network really needs to be at a place where a bus is coming every 15 or more than 20 minutes, so that people know that when they go to a bus stop, it will be there, and they won't have to be waiting a very long period of time. And then it needs to be convenient, basically easy for the customer to use and easy to access. So what this means is having the bus schedules, you just heard about the 52 kind of being inconsistent, making them consistent all day long on clock-based headways, so coming every 15, 30, 60, really easy to understand. Also, working with our local jurisdictions to make sure there's good bicycle and pedestrian access into the corridors, and we are doing that now. We work with them on all their complete street projects and many other infrastructure investments. And then providing amenities at our higher ridership stops, so that would be moving forward. You'll hear next from Bonnie with our shelter deployment plan and keep putting those out at the higher ridership stops. And then finally, we now have, as Brad mentioned, this first and last mile service, so that provides that access into our core network for people who live beyond that walk distance. When your core services are fast and frequent and reliable, people do ride more. We see this everywhere in the country. And even though we just looked at system-wide increases for those 3 examples, there are other systems. I recently returned from a conference and that are improving core routes and have seen ridership specifically increase on those routes, even if their overall systems increase. So I think that's very encouraging because people that ride today will ride more. They'll be able to use it for more trips. People who maybe are struggling to afford a car but have one can start using transit, and then even those maybe infrequent users can use it for some of their trips. And when this happens, ridership goes up, as do fare revenues. So looking again at our ridership chart, PSTA's top 6 routes over here on the left carry almost 50% of our ridership, but they only get 30% of our resources. And the lowest performing routes, the 10 least productive, carry only 3% of our riders and get 10% of our resources. The highest ridership routes are the most productive, or among the most productive. These ones over here average about 24 trips per revenue hour, whereas our lowest ridership routes average fewer than 10, and some get down in the single digits as you get towards the right. I guess it's fewer. So again, just reinforcing that we want to try to reinvest our resources that are in these low-performing routes into the core network so that we can increase ridership.
Who's that guy?
Hey, he's a random rider.
And while this does mean that a good number of routes may be eliminated or may see reductions, for example, reductions in some of the evening service, or maybe sections of the route reduced, 77% of PSTA's riders would see improved service. And this is because we're improving service on the core routes, and that is where most of our riders are. This also includes a majority of lower income riders. And now, something we couldn't say 5 years ago is that with our Direct Connect program, with our TD late shift, both of which could potentially be expanded if we, allocate more budget to them, and our on-demand paratransit program that's in development, 100% of Pinellas County residents do have access to our mobility services. So today, again, 50-50 coverage versus core. And then what we're recommending is that we move to a network that is 36% coverage and about 65% core. And on this map, you can see the core would be the red and the blue. The red is really the core, but we count the blue in that. That's 30-minute service. And then you also see all of our Direct Connect locations on here. So you can see that people do have access into the core network for a small cost via the Uber, the taxi, or wheelchair service. So our recommendations are to increase our core route services to frequencies of 15 to 20 minutes all day, to provide limited stop service. You're already hearing we're trying to do that on the 52. We're talking about 30-minute, but getting down to even better than that on Route 4, Route 18, and Route 52, and these are the corridors. And then potentially in the longer term, Route 18, these are the corridors that we would look to as future BRT corridors. We're asking you today to allow us to bring this out to the public, to get those comments. We already have a website. You can get to it through our regular PSTA.net website. We're already getting on the calendars for community events, for committee meetings, and the like. And then we'll be planning to go out to our riders as well. We know there's going to be some concerns. We know people will come out and they will be upset. And it may be likely that we won't make all of the cuts that are in this preliminary recommendations. Another option is that perhaps there's support for other funding resources that we can then put into the core network and achieve a better core network ratio to coverage without cutting all the coverage. But that would require some additional revenue. And then right now, Ford Pinellas is taking the lead to set up a workshop with PSTA and the county to talk about some of those potential other funding options. So our recommendation is that we are able to go out and in partnership with Ford Pinellas, because this is what we end up with here is what's going to roll into the long-range transportation plan. Go out and do a lot of public outreach in the months of September and October, and then we will revise our recommendation based on input and bring them back to you in December. And with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Well, I think you're right that we're in a different place than we were a few years ago when we had people ready to burn us at the stake. But they have some options, and I think when we present it, I'm all in favor of putting it out there and getting the feedback before we change things. I think it's important to make sure they understand those options they have to actually get on one of these core routes, and how we're not taking their service away, we're just changing it.
And we do a lot of hands-on outreach when proposing, just like we did with the 444, is we ride the routes and we teach every one of the riders how to use Direct Connect, what their other options are.
Could we go back to the slide with the 3664? This is just a point of clarification. Should we put on there the 300X and 100X also?
Yeah, they're on here, but yes, they should be in the legend.
Yeah, they should be maybe more, and ultimately we're going to have also a direct route, I don't know the number, but the direct route from causeway. Is that correct? We're gonna have the causeway covered?
Hopefully, yeah.
Okay, so that's way down the line, but the other two are running now. So maybe we should have them one, are they in the light green? Is that?
No, they're here in gray, and notice this is white, but yeah, we can make them more prominent and put them in the legend,
Yeah,
certainly.
because those are active now, and those are important.
Oh, I guess it is
Yeah.
in the legend, it's just not prominent.
I think it's great, I'm excited about it.
Great. Y'all weren't here last time. No, I do.
Oh, I put that picture
It'll be
of the
different.
boardroom.
And I
It's
see
a whole different,
our
I think it's all
reference at the
different
podium.
from before, and also
What?
with Forward Pinellas involved here, and we get FDOT, and we really work that relationship, and we get some of that grant money.
When did we take that picture? Wow.
If we can.
We had a packed house that day.
That
Must have
was
been
a
doing
green
something
light
wrong.
thing.
Yeah.
That's Barbara.
Well, and frankly, we don't have any choice but
Yeah.
to provide an efficient service,
Yeah.
and this is the way we get there. We don't have any more room, or not enough room, to provide service all the time to everybody, so this makes sense to me. Thank you guys for all. It takes a different kind of brain than mine to work this stuff out, because.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. Also, going back to that same slide I was talking about before, the orange dots refer to the locations for the pickup points for Direct Connect.
Yes, they're the pickup or drop off. You can take a
Yeah.
trip to or from each of those locations.
Okay.
Can I say something?
Yes,
Just
please.
add a little bit. Good morning, Whit Blanton. The role of Fort Pinellas is both land use and transportation, as you know, and so what we've been talking about is looking at these core routes as areas where we can enable and encourage significant increases in density of development and provide local governments with technical assistance and guidance about how they can support that, which would also promote ridership. So part of our strategy in talking with senior county staff would be to look at, are there opportunities to bring in some additional revenues that potentially the county commission might commit from gas tax revenues, maybe tourist development tax revenues if that's an appropriate source, or just from general fund to strengthen these areas. And the idea would be that we would look at potentially reserving land for affordable housing around these station areas or along these route corridors, giving developers incentives to build affordable housing into their product by reducing parking requirements around station areas, and working with local governments to establish a complete streets approach for improved pedestrian and bicycle connectivity into these station areas. And I'm convinced that if we did this right and provide that financial incentive to the development community, that we will see substantial increases in revenues, not only to the county and to other local governments along these lines from development activity, but also revenues to PSTA from an operations standpoint, because we're growing ridership, especially if you couple that with reduced parking requirements in these areas. So I think these corridors are the right corridors to pursue. They make a lot of sense. There's just not a lot of opportunities for growth in Pinellas County outside of these corridors. And we also have the FDOT doing an intermodal center feasibility study for the Gateway area that may or may not be coupled with a regional transit project, but if we could find a home for a really good transit center in the Gateway Mid-County area, then potentially the 300X, the 100X could also tie into that with the 52. And I think that's an opportunity for growth as we're doing our master plan for the Gateway area. So it's more than just the MPO, it's actually a land use strategy that's part of this whole approach.
Well, I might kind of go back to the last bus plan about Ryan Dairy Road and that corridor there. That is a place for expansion of jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to figure out how to encourage that as well. Not just, affordable housing is my baby, but the jobs in the middle of the county and being able to get to them. Right now, this kind of reduces one's ability to get to a job on Bryan Dairy, but, well, maybe not.
Well, actually, yes. They retained Bryan Dairy and made it consistent 60-minute service, whereas now it's just a handful of trips.
Oh, all right, good. I just think we need to be thinking ahead about that, because that's some of the land that is available.
Which that bill didn't connect, and here we go, we have our airport. There's our airport building up, all these flights coming in there. And we don't really have a center for taking care of that, so I think it all adds in. It's just a good time to do it. As you said.
We have
As you
some
said,
TDC
Pat,
funds with that.
Huh?
TDC funds are a great use for
Yeah.
getting people
Yeah.
away from our airport.
Cool.
So yeah, what do we think? I guess
Okay. Are we looking for a motion or anything? Or?
we need a recommendation or
To
something.
bring it to the public.
Yeah, I'll make that recommendation.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to subject ourselves to lots of.
No. I was thinking
That's
like
okay.
It's
a
okay.
verb.
Well, yeah, we don't know what they're thinking unless we ask them.
Yeah.
So, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
Do we have transformation that people want us to do, until it affects them?
Right.
But,
Yeah.
I mean, I think the general public is certainly in favor of having a more efficient bus system and moving more people, but what about my bus?
Exactly.
Right.
We'll deal with that.
Exactly.
I think we're moving in the right direction. So, yes, sir.
One of the questions that tie in with that, if we're really concentrating on more of these types of routes, Heather mentioned shelters. Basically, we deploy existing shelters to this core route so that we have that really thoroughly covered, because there's still a lot of people standing in the rain along our routes right now.
Absolutely.
I think we're about to
Yeah.
We are.
Our shelter deployment, but
Okay.
to that point, we did attend a conference a few weeks ago, and we had a chance to talk to some of the folks from these areas, Jacksonville and Houston. And even after Houston made their changes, because they did stop consolidation as well, they were able to look at the changes in their ridership and then add shelters. And what they found is that the stops that added shelters got even more ridership, and that even that route got even more ridership. And so it does all sort of go together, and we would anticipate expanding our shelter program.
Okay.
Good.
All right.
All
Yes.
right. Don't be look so strategic.
Like,
Yes.
it's all this sort
We're doing the right thing. Yes. Okay, so I'm just gonna go over a quick update on our shelter deployment plan. So just wanted to talk a little bit briefly about the importance of shelters and adding shelters out in the community. So one of the biggest or most important things about adding shelters here is we have a lot of hot weather, especially now. Shelters really provide that escape from the heat and the sun. We also have a lot of rain, especially now in the summer, so good escape for if you're waiting for the bus in the rain. It's also, has a positive impact on our community. We have nice looking passenger amenities, nice looking shelters. It's a really good reflection on public transit. It's good for PSTA. And just like Cassandra was saying, a comfortable wait experience really encourages ridership. I know that I've talked to people in the community, and I'm really surprised at how many people see shelters and they say that's important. They would be more likely to take transit if they saw more shelters out there, especially nice new shelters. So we procured this new shelter design. This is a new one out at the Largo Transit Center from Brasco in 2015. It's nice and new, colorful, a little tropical, modern looking, and we are currently in our third phase of the deployment plan. So we first got these in 2015.
Can I ask something about,
Yep.
maybe you're gonna talk about it, but
Yep.
we've had some feedback that these don't necessarily stop the rain when it's raining really hard, because they're not solid, are they? They're like.
Right, yeah, they have kind of that,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, they do let some airflow in, so I definitely feel like you're not just stuck in the shelter and it can heat up really quickly. So yeah, one drawback is I think it lets a little bit of the rain in, but I've been in one of the shelters during a very heavy downpour. You know, you're gonna get wet no matter what, but just a little bit. I think it did a pretty good job of.
These whatever you call those fatter ones, you can get back in there.
Another word.
Yeah, the 8x12.
Or wider ones,
Yeah.
wider ones. But
Yeah.
I mean, the problem really is the right of way. Sometimes they only have one panel there, and then that's kind of skinny.
Yeah.
You do get wet. And that
Yeah.
picture that we got from the
Well, and
citizen
they're
was
designed for airflow.
a skinny one.
Right, so you can't have
Yeah.
it both ways.
Yeah, that is something that comes up, but
Is that a question?
yeah.
Minneapolis has heat.
But yeah, they're definitely cooler than the older ones with the black roof. So it's definitely nice sometimes. But I'll talk about some of our priorities in adding the new shelters. So one of our first priorities is adding shelters at high ridership stops that don't have a shelter. So making sure that stops with average daily boardings of over 40 a day, make sure we get shelters out at all those locations where they have the necessary right-of-way. We also want to replace old shelters at the high ridership stops, again focusing on those transit centers, the shelters that are really old, making sure we pull those out and replace them with the newer design. We're also looking at working with the community and seeing where they want to add shelters, where do different municipalities want to focus. You know, maybe they have revitalization plans, available grant funding, working with the county on different projects to maximize funding, pull funding from other sources so we use less of our PSTA funding for shelters. So I'll talk a little about our 3 phases. So phase 1 of our shelter deployment plan, we installed these shelters throughout 2016. Really the focus here was to add shelters to existing high ridership stops. So replacing shelters at Tyrone, the transit centers, Pinellas Park Transit Center, Gateway Mall, Largo, making sure that these transfer centers where we have our highest ridership look their best. And you know, most people that are taking a trip on PSTA end up at a transfer center. So we're still working on permitting the last couple from phase 1. We're working to get permits from Duke Energy up in Tarpon Springs to add 2 more shelters to Huey Avenue, where we have a lot of transfers at Tarpon and Huey. So our second phase of the shelter deployment plan, we installed these starting at the very end of 2016 and then throughout 2017. This was really, you know, making sure that we have shelters at those high ridership stops that didn't have a shelter before. So taking a look at our data, looking at the average daily boardings, identifying those stops that don't currently have a shelter, making sure if they have the necessary right-of-way that we get a shelter out there. So I added more to Almerton Road, added a bunch in South County, South St. Pete. We're still working with the city of Clearwater to get some permits out of Clearwater Beach. You know, definitely Mark Knight is working on that, wrapping that up pretty shortly. And then our last phase that we're working on now, phase 3. So this phase is a little bit different. We ordered these shelters last year. They came in, we ordered a few different batches of shelters and they've been coming in. So we've received these shelters. We're in the process of getting permits to get these out there, but we're really working on partnering with the community and different municipalities to utilize grant funding, just increasing the amount of funding that we have for shelters. So like again, we can use, combine that funding with our existing funding to add as many shelters as we can out in the community. So we've been working with the Community Development Block Grant where we're adding 7 brand new shelters. They're replacing old shelters in unincorporated Pinellas County. We're adding 7 shelters to Enterprise Road. We've been able to work with the city of St. Pete to get all new shelters for the Skyway Marina District. So that anywhere in the Skyway Marina District that has ridership that would warrant a shelter, we're getting a new one. All the old ones will be replaced with a brand new design. Also working with developers on getting them to contribute funding for shelters, updating the bus stop nearest their new development. So we've gotten contracts, and I'm gonna start working on the permits to get those put out there. And then we're also working on just really increasing the coverage of our shelters, making sure that when you look at the map of Pinellas County, there's nowhere where you see a bunch of gaps where riders wouldn't have access to a shelter. But the last thing I'll mention is that with the Skyway Marina District shelters, that was through a program called the Shelter Match Program. So we started this program kind of in response to the overwhelming support and excitement about our new shelter design. So when we started phase 1, putting the shelters out there, lots of municipalities were like, oh, when are we going to get those? They look great. And I think I met with a few people, and I said, well, I mean, with the limited funding that we have, I can't guarantee when you'll see it, especially for stops that just you pick out that may not have the ridership that would support a shelter, our high standards for ridership. So we created a shelter match program where a municipality or the county can approach us and say, we'd like to partner with you on getting shelters out in a specific corridor or just area of their municipality that they'd like to see new shelters, and they can contribute. Usually with the standard shelter design, we go 50-50 on the shelter. Once that agreement is signed, then we just put them out there as soon as possible. We'll put them in our newest shelter order and get those out where the county and municipality would like to see them as soon as possible. So our first one was the Skyway Marina District, working with them to get those 12 shelters out there. With that partnership, it's a little bit more complicated. They're adding 6 completely with their own grant funding, and then we partnered on 6 with the 50-50 split. We can also work with a municipality on custom shelters or art shelters. We're not able really to contribute to the shelter structure itself, but can donate parts or add concrete, help with the installation, getting permitting or anything necessary for that. We're working with the North Pinellas Cultural Alliance on adding shelters and art shelters in each of the cities in the North Pinellas Cultural Alliance, and we already have one out in Dunedin, in front of East Dunedin Hospital. If anyone gets a chance to drive by that, it's pretty cool. But we're also working with Largo, Pinellas Park on these shelter match projects.
In Wheelman, I see.
Yes.
What's the cost of a shelter?
So it depends on the size, but I would usually say the fully loaded cost of our 4x8, which is, unless it's at a transfer center, almost all of our shelters are a 4x8 shelter. It's just over $12,000. So that includes the shelter structure, that includes the bench, the map package, the map holder, the solar lighting, and that also includes trash can, bike rack, all of those installations, as well as the concrete work that needs to be done.
Do they have? Do we have to get a permit each time we do?
Yes.
Yes, I thought so. Okay. What about in Largo? This is not possible because we're not allowed to advertise. But
Right.
in other cities, would it be possibly for a business to participate in some way in providing funding, or all or part of the funding, so that they, and in turn, have some kind of acknowledgement, a plaque or something that says
Yeah.
contributed by company X?
Yeah.
So that we could get more done, because there's, like for instance, East Bay has long stretches with no shelters, and so it's not like you can walk to the next block and get a shelter. It's a long distance, and you see people standing in the rain or in the sun or whatever along that route. That's a busy route, but and that's a bad example because Largo won't allow you to advertise. But in other cities, possibly we could get some kind of a plan put together where a company could contribute all or part of that and get some kind of a plaque, like you see in the center of the roadways where somebody's doing the landscaping, participating with the landscape, something like that, so we could accelerate the process of getting riders protected.
Yeah, so I mean, you're right that not many municipalities municipalities allow the advertising shelters, but where they are allowed, we do work with Signal Outdoor, and they want to put up shelters wherever they can. So where they're allowed to put them up, they are putting them up. But those are just general advertising shelters. But working with a business that would want to enhance the bus stop nearest their building, we definitely do work on things like that. Some of the most recent things that we're doing are working with developers that are, redoing the landscape around the right of way and their business, and they're wanting to partner with us on enhancing the bus stop there, whether it's adding a new shelter or replacing the old shelter. So we've started that process with a few places, but anyone that approaches us that's interested in contributing funds to shelters, we work with.
Just a quick comment about the shelter requirements. You said we have 650 in Pinellas County.
Yes, and that's including any advertising shelters, any city-funded shelters. There's a few different municipalities that have put their own shelters.
And are there federal and state other requirements for where shelters go regarding communities or, for example, economic considerations, et cetera, or are there none?
No, there's no guidelines that I know of that require you to put shelters in specific locations. We do have right-of-way requirements, so if there's not enough right-of-way, we'd either need to get an easement, and anyone that's worked with me on that knows it's a very difficult process to get easements sometimes. But no, we mainly look at the average daily boarding data when we're...
Well, there are requirements. Lots of the shelters in Pinellas County are only there because a city or the county or the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council back in the day when they had power required the shopping mall or development to have a shelter. That's like the one in Seminole that has pineapples on it. The city of Seminole required that of the developer, and so they paid for it and they put it in there.
I thought there was something about the 1964 Civil Rights Act or something.
We have to show the federal government that we don't discriminate in the way we put up shelters because of the Civil Rights Act. We do that. We have shelters everywhere. But this process that Bonnie is talking about it's a lot harder than looking at that Pinellas County map with all the dots on it. It shows because each city has their own permitting process. This is like a whole construction project, every single location, and then we're pretty much already there. I think Bonnie told me or something like there's like no stops in St. Petersburg. I don't think there's any stops in St. Petersburg that average over 40 riders a day that don't have a shelter that have right of way.
Right.
I mean, there's lots of stops in St. Petersburg that have 40 riders a day that there's there's no public FDOT or city right-of-way so we can stick a shelter there. So it would take us...
So according to our statistics, we basically have the shelters in place with their existing
But there's so many places in Pinellas County that don't have no right-of-way.
Right.
That there's just a little mini grass strip or something. So it would take all the developers, like Commissioner Barkley was saying, to give us right-of-way to stick a shelter there.
Yeah.
But
And
are
some
there
are willing to
places
do
that we would need to have shelters for our
Yeah.
concept of the 40?
Yes. Well, like he was talking about on East Bay in Largo, there's just very little right-of-way that's owned publicly before like all the different fast food places and stuff. Their right-of-way starts.
So
we
according to the
can-
existing bus plan we have currently, we can identify exactly where we still need to have them. There's a certain number of those, and then we have the obstacle of having the right-of-way.
Yeah.
So we can identify that.
And now, as of last month, now if they would give us a right-of-way, which is very rare, if they would, we'd give them an award. They'd get an award. They'd get a sticker. We'd love them.
Well, it might
should
be
have
A
helpful.
photo with Whit and me.
They should get reductions in impact fees too.
Yeah, that's true.
It might be helpful for us to have that as elected, so we could kind of push on that a little bit if we, you know, if there's any possibility of
Yeah.
working that out.
Unless the
Yeah.
route changes significantly.
Well, right.
Yeah.
Well-
Only on the core route.
Yeah, and the core routes, yeah.
So if we looked at alternative shelter or two shelters, I'm thinking about the problem about right-of-ways, especially in downtown St. Pete, where it's just a sidewalk and a building. And you know, to work with the building owners to install a canopy on a corner or, you know, off the building, as opposed to trying to get a full right-of-way and put a complete shelter, but still giving, you know, shade. A lot of these, you know, their
Yeah.
apartment complexes or their mixed-use residential, commercial.
Yeah, we've looked at, especially in downtown St. Pete, at a different shelter design, something a little smaller, like you mentioned. It is very much like a canopy that would take up less right of way. It also wouldn't have any seating capacity. I know sometimes that's a concern in downtown and with the business owners. So we do have that as an option. We've been talking to the city about it. Yeah, picked out a few different little canopy designs.
Okay.
Any other questions about shelter? This is just informational, right?
Yeah.
But I think it would be good to get you, as elected officials, all the cities, say our list of
Yeah.
top, that are on the core routes that don't have a shelter because they don't have, but they have high ridership, but due to right of way, they would need an agreement with the private owner.
Well,
To
and
publish
there's
that
no
list.
need for unincorporated areas.
Yeah.
It's still fine. All right, thank you. Hey, Brad, future meeting subjects.
We have building requirements that require outdoors, but we don't have requirements that require protection for public access.
Well, again, I think what we'll do at the Finance Committee, before this, as you know, the Finance Committee is recommending the design contract for our Central Avenue BRT. And the committee asked to make sure that we get updates on that, or that the committee gets updates on that regularly. I think the Planning Committee should get updates on that as it pertains to the whole regional, you know, how it fits into the regional plan and how that's going. So I think we'll do that. And then, as this thing notes, we are finishing up fiscal year 18 and going into fiscal year 19, and then we have our performance scorecard. It's really the planning committee that will hopefully recommend some of the metrics that we look to for next year. Not that might change from the ones that we are evaluating ourselves on this year. So that's on there, and then we put on here the sustainability plan. We have a whole sustainability program at PSTA that hopefully we're going to advance, maybe, into get a new category someday. Someday.
Working on it.
And do you update on that too?
Okay,
I feel like I'm forgetting something.
all right.
Hopefully, maybe by now you've all been invited to the October 3rd. I don't know if we've actually sent out invites yet to the October 3rd downtown St. Pete ribbon cutting for our new expanded looper and electric bus launch. But it's going to be on Wednesday, October 3rd, before the service actually starts on Monday, the 7th.
What time?
10:30, St. Pete City Hall. You will be getting invited if you haven't already.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Yes, ma'am.
So we have a great relationship with FDOT, and they've been very generous to us lately. One of the things that was approved at the Finance Committee was some additional funding for our autonomous vehicle project. But we also heard yesterday, and this will probably be finalized in October, that they are putting into their work program hardened shoulders on I-275 to the tune $9 to $10 million. That would allow us to run our 100X on the shoulders. And in addition to that, they'll be putting money in for expansion of the 100X in 2021. So we'll have
Good.
that much time to figure out how to match that money. And that would, should.
He says it in public forums.
Yes. So Debbie, please find the money. But it is very exciting, and it just
Because she announced it.
shows that, you know, being part of a regional system and working with FDOT really does pay off.
Cool. Good work. All right, anything else? We are adjourned then.
Who was the bank robber who said, well, why do you rob banks? It's for all the money.
Yes.
Woody Sutton. Willie Sutton.
Willie Sutton? That's like FDOT.
Yeah, Woody on the.
Why do you FDOT all the time? They have all the money.
So so I used to work for this consulting firm, and the guy who ran the local office was a former district secretary in District 1, and really